is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Blood of Elves, Chapter 2, brought to you by Melanie. In this chapter, a enchantress named Triss comes to help out our friend and his little protege. And it turns out that she's, super into him, and she can't tell if he's super into her, and it seems like he's super into her, but he, doesn't want to say it or act like he's super into her, except for, here and there. And she's kind of starting to lose it, but also she's really interested in this little girl. There's a lot happening here, guys. I really don't usually go for romance stuff, but I was kind of into this. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Forgive me if I'm sniffly. I don't know what is going on with me today, but I have been just sneezing and sniffing all morning. This chapter, I was really glad, actually. Melanie tried to book this with me, and for reasons I won't get into, it was a little bit of a mess because of the service that I'm using right now. And I started reading this morning because I try and read right before I record so that everything is really fresh. And I realized that, there wasn't a good 50-page, cutoff spot. And because it was either about 35, 40 pages or, 70 pages if you go into the next chapter. And once I read the one solitary chapter, I was like, I can't imagine that she wants me to read the whole next one. And I checked my email, and she had actually purposefully made sure to tell me, just read chapter 2. And I'm relieved because it's a packed chapter. There's a lot to talk about. So this chapter is and correct me if I'm wrong, Melanie, have we met Triss Marigold before? I don't think we have, but her name sounds familiar. And so I'm kind of thinking maybe I did, or maybe she was mentioned offhand by somebody, or she was in the background of something. And I just don't remember at this point, because the last episode where I live read the first chapter was almost 2 full months ago at this point. Melanie says, heard about offhand by the crowd in chapter 1 as dead. Okay, right. She is a lot of fun. I'm a big Triss fan, I'm finding. She's just so over the dumb fucking bullshit of men in a lot of ways. But that does not preclude her from being, very attracted to a particular man. And I can relate to that so deeply. There is a thing now where whenever a man says or does something particularly gross and stupid, there will be a woman commenting under it, proof that sexuality is not a choice. Which, it's very specifically mentioned that Triss hooks up with women at one point in her life as well. So she's clearly bisexual, but there are times where I'm I wish that I could just not be attracted to men because they can be such a problem. And I feel like if she could just shut that down entirely, she might, because it's decidedly inconvenient and distracting and just sort of preying on her mind in a way that she feels almost ashamed of, I think, because she's a very confident, capable woman. And she is not used to being at a disadvantage in terms of feeling like she cares about or likes someone more than they like or care about her. And it's just kind of humiliating for her in a way that it should not be. But she has a lot of pride, clearly. And I just hardcore relate to this. So we start off with Triss, and she has this newish horse. And she's using magic pretty frequently to keep herself warm because she's kind of out in the middle of the beginnings of a storm. And it's mentioned later on that she had to spend the night in this like ramshackle cabin that's practically falling down. And if she didn't have the use of magic, she'd probably have died because it was so cold. She's up this mountainside, you know, and the horse is sort of reacting when she uses magic. Like, it's not entirely comfortable with this arrangement. And she actually says, and I love this because the horse seems to be, I don't know if it's capable of communicating like this with everyone or if it's only because she's an enchantress that it can seem to understand her in a way that horses don't tend to understand people. But it's very fun to me. "You've got two options, old thing," said Triss, pulling on her gloves. "Either you get used to magic, or I sell you to some peasants to pull a plow." The gelding pricked up its ears, snorted vapor through its nostrils, and obediently started down the wooden mountainside. The magician leaned over the saddle, avoiding being lashed by frosty branches. So yeah, she uses this spell to warm her up, and also uses the spell to kind of to push down the hunger, because she apparently either did not bring enough food, or she expected to get there sooner, or I don't know. And she's thinking about the fact that the castle, like, she knows that it is nearby and that she is able to get there because she sort of knows the way. Like, she knows the markers to look for. And I'm going to read this because I think it gives a good impression of the writing in general regarding her surroundings. I would never say that this author goes into as much detail as, say, somebody like Tolkien, who I feel like can just be endless with this kind of stuff. But let's see. The land around Kaer Morhen was famous for its wildness and inaccessibility, and the gap in the granite wall that was a vital landmark was not easy for an inexperienced eye to find. It was enough to turn down one of the numerous gullies and gorges to lose sight of it. And even she, who knew the land, knew the way, and knew where to look for the pass, could not allow herself to lose concentration for an instant. The forest came to an end. A wide valley opened before the enchantress, strewn with boulders, which ran across the valley to the sheer mountain slope on the other side. The Gwenlech, the river of white stones, flowed down the heart of the valley, foaming, seething between the boulders and logs washed along by the current. Here, in its upper reaches, the Gwenlech was no more than a wide but shallow stream. Up here it could be crossed without any difficulty. Lower down, in Caedwen, in its middle reaches, the river was an insurmountable obstacle, rushing and breaking against the beds of its deep chasms. The gelding, driven into the water, hastened its step, clearly wanting to reach the opposite bank as quickly as possible. Triss held it back lightly. The stream was shallow, reaching just above the horse's fetlocks, but the pebbles covering the bed were slippery, and the current was sharp and quick. The water churned and foamed around her mount's legs. So that's a lot of how this chapter starts off, is just very detailed descriptions of where she is. It's her relationship to where she has come from and where she has going, and what even like going in so far as to describe, like, if you follow this river further down, it's like this, but here it's like this, which against my usual inclination, I did find interesting. I feel like it's because it's done fairly briefly. It's detailed, but I don't feel like it's dragging things out into directions that I just don't care about. So she is thinking about the fact that if they do get hit with a blizzard, because she's feeling like a change in the air that doesn't seem to bode well, she's thinking about how, like, I can find the path using telepathy. I can use magic to make myself, like, not sensitive to the cold. I can do all that, but I really don't want to have to do that. And yeah, I really enjoy that because, you know, there is, it's the sort of thing that we, as people who cannot use magic, allegedly, often hear about somebody who has power and are just like, well, why don't they just use power to do X, Y, and Z? And it sort of comes with this assumption that using power is effortless. And while we don't necessarily get a lot of descriptions from her perspective of what it costs her to use power, like we don't have her being fatigued or, necessarily feeling drained in any way. It's doubtless got to be an effort of concentration at very least. And I completely understand having the ability to do something and not necessarily wanting to fucking do it. It's the same thing as like I could go and buy a roast chicken and a container of mashed potatoes because I know how to make a roast chicken and mashed potatoes, but I don't fucking feel like it. Thank you. I'll go buy it. And I like that being pointed out with her because we haven't gotten a perspective of, like, in these stories, at least when I say these stories, I'm also referring to the book club because I covered the very first of these books, like the prequel book, for the book club. And all of the stories in there were from Gareth's perspective. And this book is the first one where we get a couple of different POVs. And the various POVs that we have gotten so far have not been from the magician's perspective. It's just been a magician has been there. We had Yennefer in the previous chapter who saved Dandelion. But I find it interesting now to be in her perspective and see what she sees, and also for her to be a woman. I am curious as this book goes on to see how well Andres is able to write women, because there are some things in this chapter that feel like he does not know what he's talking about. And you probably know where I'm going with this if you've read this chapter, the women's complaints. But yeah, there are some things that I'm just like, all right, that feels like something that a guy would think women go through and is not necessarily accurate. But we'll see if maybe, this is just how he's chosen to write this character and not necessarily representative of the way he handles women, like from beginning to end. So she is able to find the path finally. And I love this moment so much again. Forced to step over fallen tree trunks, the horse snorted, danced, and stamped. Triss pulled at the reins, tugged at her mount's shaggy ear, and scolded it harshly with spiteful allusions to its lameness. The steed, looking for all the world as though it were ashamed of itself, walked with a more even and sprightly gait and picked its way through the thicket. So yeah, I really enjoyed a lot of the relationship that she has with her horse. Like, there's just something I have to think that it's a special thing that she's got going on with this horse because she is a magician, and that this isn't necessarily the relationship that somebody has with their horse, but who knows? So she's finding a path, and there is a fallen tree trunk that kind of crosses over this sort of gorge that she would have to pass under in order to access the path. And as she's riding up towards it, she hears somebody running, and she turns around, and it says she turned in her saddle, pulled on the reins, and waited for the Witcher to run out onto the log. Now, okay, first indicator, she knows exactly who is, who lives in the place where she is heading, and that this is a training area. She's very familiar with all of this. A Witcher did run now onto the log, flitted along it like an arrow without slowing down, without even using his arms to aid his balance, running nimbly, fluently, with incredible grace. He flashed by, approaching and disappearing amongst the trees without disturbing a single branch. Triss sighed loudly, shaking her head in disbelief, because the Witcher, judging by his height and build, was only about 12. So she follows this child along a little bit further as she continues up this path. And she's not sure that she's actually going to be able to catch up. But she is, and I like this a lot, if she did not catch the boy at the precipice, she might not see him at all. She had already visited Kaer Morhen a few times and knew she only saw what the Witchers wanted her to see. Triss was not so naive as to be unaware that they wanted to show her only a tiny fraction of the things to be seen in Kaer Morhen. So she's trying to catch up with this kid in a way to simply like get more information, to be able to observe more. Because while she has been invited to this place, it's not going to be an open door. She's going to, and we see that very clearly later on, that they like want her help, but they want to do that. They want to take advantage of her help without actually putting themselves at risk in any way or giving information of any kind. And that's not gonna work for your girl Triss. Triss is like, I'm sorry, I will be here to help you out, but y'all are gonna have to like fess up a few things to me because this isn't gonna happen. I'm not gonna just hand out information willy-nilly. So she finally catches up and realizes that the child is not a boy, it is a girl. And the child has fallen over and basically like done that thing that you do as a kid when even though you are wearing like pants, you skin your knee so badly that the pants are like, you know, torn back and your knee is skinned and bloody underneath it. I think about that sometimes, like what havoc as a child I wreaked on some of my clothing. And I was not as bad as a lot of kids are in that regard. And how much you change as you grow that you don't have those kinds of things happen the same way anymore, unless you're somebody who like does mountain climbing or the kinds of like hobbies that can be pretty dangerous, you know, like I had a friend who did BMX riding and he ran into this kind of accident still fairly frequently, falling off his bike and skinning his elbows and arms and calves and whatnot. But the Enchantress comes up to her and is just horrified by the fact that this girl is wearing a sort of like a jerkin and pants that are really badly fitted, like barely count as clothing, sewn together with this, like, she actually says, or rather stuck together, which I feel like that wording is very evocative, or rather stuck together. Like that evokes a sort of sewing that feels immediately apparent in my mind's eye. Like I can see what she means by that. And I might not be correct, but I feel like it's effective nonetheless. And I like that moment a lot. The only thing that really fits her properly are her boots, which are up to her knees. And that makes sense because she's probably wearing the boots that she had on when Geralt came and got her, her belts and her sword. So Triss comes up to her and offers to help her out and is able to heal her knee and fix the tear in her clothing. And the little girl is a bit suspicious of Triss, as she should be. I mean, it's just a good policy as a child alone to be suspicious of anyone you don't know. Just a good idea. And Triss is able to calm her a little bit by saying, listen, I'm going to Kaer Morhen, the Witchers know me, and there's no way I would have been able to get this far if I didn't already know the way. So you know that, you know, you haven't met anybody else out on this trail, have you? Like, this is, obviously I'm here because I know what I'm doing. So, yeah, her name is Ciri, and this is the girl that we met in the previous chapter that Geralt whisks away. It's so hard for me to say her name and not think of the Ciri on my cell phone. And I'm just going to put that out there and continue. I want to like call her Ciri or Cheery or something, like pronounce it a different way. But I always default back to Ciri in my head as I'm reading. And she says, let's see, I prefer, it doesn't hurt anymore and there's no hole. Was that magic? You've guessed it. Are you a witch? Guessed again. Although I prefer to be called an enchantress. To avoid getting it wrong, you can call me by my name, Triss. Just Triss. Come on, Ciri, my horse is waiting at the bottom. We'll go to Kaer Morhen together. I ought to run. Ciri shook her head. It's not good to stop running, because you get milk in your muscles. And I was like, wait, hold on. And then later on, Triss says to herself, I know how to deal with lactic acid. And I'm like, oh, okay. Actually, calling it milk in your muscles is probably pretty good shorthand when you're dealing with something like this. And that just made me giggle a little bit. I enjoy that a lot. So the little girl gets on the horse ahead of Triss and obviously can ride. Like, she's trying to take the reins and control things. And Triss is just kind of like, all right, listen, fine. You can lead the way, but you've got to make room for me on the damn saddle. And she starts to come up to the castle, and it's just a ruin. Like, and we knew this, we saw this in the last chapter. But I feel like seeing it from her perspective rather than the perspective of like a frightened child, which is where we see it. We see it from Ciri's perspective at the end of the previous chapter, changes it a little bit. From there, they could see the ruins of Kaer Morhen huddled against the stone precipices, the partially demolished trapezium of the defensive wall, the remains of the barbican and gate, the thick, blunt column of the donjon. The gelding snorted and jerked its head, crossing what remained of the bridge over the moat. Triss tugged at the reins. The decaying skulls and skeletons strewn across the riverbed made no impression on her. She had seen them before. I don't like this, the girl suddenly remarked. It's not as it should be. The dead should be buried in the ground, under a barrow. Shouldn't they? They should, the magician agreed calmly. I think so too. But the Witchers treat this graveyard as a reminder. Reminder of what? Kaer Morhen, Triss said as she guided the horse towards the shattered arcades, was assaulted. There was a bloody battle here, in which almost all the Witchers died. Only those who weren't in the keep at the time survived. Who attacked them, and why? I don't know, she lied. It was a terribly long time ago, Ciri. Ask the Witchers about it. I have, grunted the girl, but they didn't want to tell me. And we, like, at the start of this chapter, we get a bit of a treatise from a complete maniac. And I'm gonna go back and read that, actually, a portion of it. Verily there is nothing so hideous as the monsters, so contrary to nature, known as witchers, for they are the offspring of foul sorcery and devilry. They are rogues without virtue, conscience, or scruple, true diabolical creations, fit only for killing. There is no place amidst honest men for such as they. And Kaer Morhen, where these infamous beings nestle, where they perform their foul practices, must be wiped from the surface of this earth, and all trace of it strewn with salt and saltpeter. By Anonymous, Monstrum, or Description of the Witcher. So, yeah, this is a really, like, ugly portion of their history that, understandably, the Witchers don't necessarily feel like this child is ready to hear. And I say understandably with an asterisk, because I feel like this is a kind of thing that adults underestimate the capacity for children to truly grasp, and they overestimate the importance of physical training as opposed to being mentally prepared for how the world is going to see you. So I feel like they're trying to shield her from this one thing while subjecting her to a lot of brutal punishment in her training on the other. And there is going to be a time where she feels incredibly proud of what she's accomplished and how far she's come. And she's going to be reacted to by some person with revulsion or fear, and she won't understand, and you guys won't have prepared her for that. And that is going to be like, especially as a woman, I feel like I feel this in my soul that when we are younger, are not yet familiar with what society expects of women and the way that they react to us being interested in certain things. And so we don't have the capacity or the restraint. Restraint feels like the wrong word, because that, I always think of restraint in a somewhat positive way. We don't have the baggage, I guess, to keep us from getting into things that we do as we get older, where we feel like we've sort of started to absorb what society tells us is appropriate for us. And then once we start to like move out into the world and we realize that being a woman who is into such and such a thing is like looked on with not necessarily even like hostility, but sometimes just derision. It can be shocking because it never even occurred to you that somebody would see you that way. And I know that there are a lot of women who dealt with this being into video games. You know, they were into video games as kids. They played all throughout high school. And then once they started to hang out with boys and said that they were into gaming, guys like tested them or pushed them about it or insinuated that they weren't really, that they only liked video games to impress boys, or that like they only just started playing, so you can't really say that you're into gaming, that kind of thing. And there's a shock that comes with that, at realizing, especially if you encounter one person that reacts that way, you can just be like, wow, okay, you're kind of an asshole, whatever. But once you start to realize that that's going to be a thing that comes up, that's just going to be how it is, it's a bit of a shock. And it can make you very self-conscious about something that you never thought twice about, and make you sort of distance yourself from a thing that you love because you are afraid of how it will be perceived by people. And the fact that they haven't educated this little girl, when she passes over the fucking site covered in bones all the time, feels... I don't know if neglectful is a fair word, but it's what I want to use. Like, they don't want to talk about it because they aren't comfortable talking about it because it's a little too close to their memory, I think. And it's frankly not about them anymore. They're training somebody new and she needs to know. And the fact that they haven't decided to inform her on how the world may treat her or see her, I don't know how many of these extremists are even left. You know, this might not even be something that she winds up running into. But it is really like, I don't know, it just feels like an oversight that's going to bite them in the ass. And I'm saying all of this before we even get to the part where she winds up having her little episode. But yeah, the magician is thinking to herself, a child trained to be a witcher, a girl at that, who has not undergone the mutations, should not be told such things. A child like that should not hear about the massacre. And I am much more willing to let the magician believe this, because at this point in the story, she hasn't seen the injuries that this little girl sustained in her daily training. She's still treating this little girl like a little girl. And I think that's a mistake, but I also understand it. And what I'm really holding the Witchers responsible for telling this girl this and needing to understand that she can handle it. Or even if she can't handle it, she still should know. And she says, and I shan't tell you either. I have even more reason to be silent, because I am a wizard, and without the aid of wizards, those fanatics would never have conquered the castle. And that hideous lampoon, that widely distributed monstrum, which stirred the fanatics up and drove them to such wickedness, was also apparently some wizard's anonymous work. But I, little Siri, do not recognize collective responsibility. I do not feel the need to expiate the events which took place half a century before my birth. That's one of those things that I'm just kind of like side-eyeing, because I feel like there is something that the author is saying here that I don't particularly like, that I might be reading too far into. Because it's one thing if she's not taking collective responsibility because some wizards did this and some didn't. And nowadays wizards are treated the same as everyone. But if wizards, have a certain privilege out in the world and she's still not really taking responsibility, I feel like that's something that she needs to start revising. Because this is just the kind of thing that sounds very much like somebody who is arguing against white privilege or racism. And it's just like, well, slavery ended 100 years ago. And that was my grandparents and my great grandparents. Like, I didn't do that. And so I shouldn't be held responsible for things that I didn't even do. And it's the kind of thing that, like, if you just took their words at surface value, no, they should not be held responsible for things they did not do. But also, that's not that simple, is it? It's not about, like, people being freed from slavery didn't suddenly ascend to the same social stratus as fucking white people. And I'm curious about, like, the way that wizards are treated by society as opposed to witchers now. There are so few witchers. I'm not sure that you're able to get a clear idea of that, but I just sort of side-eyed that passage a little bit because I felt like that was Andres saying something that I did not care for. So here comes the thing. They don't want to lie like that, said Ciri suddenly. They don't want to be a symbol, a bad conscience, or a warning. But neither do they want their dust to be swept away by the wind. Triss raised her head, hearing a change in the girl's voice. Immediately, she sensed a magical aura, a pulsating and a rush of blood in her temples. She grew tense but did not utter a word, afraid of breaking into or disrupting what was happening. An ordinary barrow. Ciri's voice was becoming more and more unnatural, metallic, cold and menacing. A mound of earth which will be overgrown with nettles. Death has cold blue eyes, and the height of the obelisk does not matter, nor does the writing engraved on it matter. Who can know that better than you, Triss Merigold, the 14th one of the hill? The enchantress froze. She saw the girl's hands clench the horse's mane. You died on the hill, Triss Merigold. The strange, evil voice spoke again. Why have you come here? Go back. Go back at once, and take this child, the child of elder blood, with you. Return her to those whom she belongs. Do this, 14th one, because if you do not, you will die once more. The day will come when the hill will claim you. The mass grave and the obelisk on which your name is engraved will claim you. And the horse neighs at this point and sort of shakes. And Ciri appears to sort of wake up, and she thinks that she fell asleep. She doesn't remember anything she had said or what happened. And Triss is searching again for the magical aura that she felt a second ago, and there is absolutely nothing. There is no indicator whatsoever that this girl has any sort of magical talent, even though a second ago it was like coming off of her in waves and very apparent. And she's just confused at how that can be, because everyone that she has met, like witchers, when you touch them, they give off this sort of like frisson of energy. And apparently magical people tend to give off a constant feel of power. So the fact that it can completely vanish from perception with this child is really unusual. And she's just super confused by that. And I liked this too. Okay, I have to mention, it says she removed her fox fur hat. And when I read fox fur, I thought it said faux fur. And I was like, why is she wearing faux fur in this world? What? But then I realized I misread it. With a swift movement of the head, tousled her hair, long, full locks, the color of fresh chestnuts with a sheen of gold, her pride and identifying characteristic. Ciri sighed with admiration. Triss smiled, pleased by the effect she'd had. Beautiful, long, loose hair was a rarity, an indication of a woman's position, her status, the sign of a free woman, and a woman who belonged to herself. The sign of an unusual woman, because normal maidens wore their hair in plaits. Normal married women hid theirs beneath a caul or coif. Women of high birth, including queens, curled their hair and styled it. Warriors cut it short. Only druids and magicians and whores wore their hair naturally so as to emphasize their independence and freedom. I like that a lot because there is something about the way that women wear, like when I was in school for costume design, I did a lot of research on, medieval and Renaissance and Elizabethan styles. And this is exactly correct. And it was something that I found really sad in a way, that there is just something that you do when you reach a certain point in your life as a woman that you have no say in. You just have to wear it that way. And the idea of a married woman having to hide her hair was just so depressing to me. It just felt so... It's meant, I think, to be like a symbol of modesty so that a man who is married to you is the only man who gets to see your hair. And that's just such a bummer, you're not allowed to enjoy yourself. It's all about whether or not he gets to see you. And it's just like, oh, get over yourselves, dudes. So they approach the ruins and the Witchers appear. And they seem to come out of nowhere. And she is a little bit startled when she sees Geralt because he looks like he's aged. And Triss is aware that, Witchers age so slowly that, in the time that she has known him, it wouldn't be perceptible to her that he has aged at all. But there is something going on mentally with him that is causing him to look really stressed and older, and just, it's a bummer. She feels like, I think she was so looking forward to seeing Geralt, and she had it in her mind that it would be this sort of light-hearted, joyous reunion. And realizing that he has been going through some shit and that things are very serious for him makes her sort of have to reevaluate very quickly what this meetup is going to be like. Excuse me. I did warn you. So there are a couple people that we meet here, and we saw them briefly in the end of the previous chapter. But we have Eskel, who looks apparently a lot like Geralt, but his hair is a different color, and he has a big scar on his head that kind of it's like a half circle that goes from around his cheek up to above his ear, I think. And let's see. Oh yeah, Lambert is not friendly. I don't know what Lambert's problem is with her, but he calls her Marigold instead of calling her Triss, and it's meant to be disrespectful. And when he smiles at her, it's meant to be sort of obvious that he's faking it. And I'm just very curious, what the fuck his deal is. If it's about her specifically, or if it's about him not wanting her here right now, or if it's did he object to her being involved? I don't know. But Lambert is he interrupts her. He calls her, by her, surname instead of her actual name, and without any sort of title. He doesn't call her Lady Marigold or anything like that. And immediately takes Ciri and goes off with her and sort of leaves the others because he doesn't want to deal with her for whatever reason. Triss gave a little shrug, pretending not to see Geralt and Eskel's embarrassed expressions. She did not say anything, not wanting to embarrass them further. And above all, she did not want them to see how very intrigued and fascinated she was by the girl. So, I love this. "I'll take your horse," offered Geralt, reaching for the reins. Triss surreptitiously shifted her hand, and their palms joined. So did their eyes. "I'll come with you," she said naturally. "There are a few little things in the saddlebags which I'll need." And I love that. She said naturally, this is a familiar dance to anybody who has been interested in somebody and they've been trying to finagle a way to be alone with that person. This kind of thing is my jam. I'm not super into actual romance once things have fully blossomed between two people a lot of the time, unless it's written very, very well. But this pre-relationship, even acknowledging that there is something there, this is something that I'm a big fan of. That tension, that excitement, and that feeling of like, are they going to be receptive to this? Are they going to admit that, because it feels like they feel the same way as me, but I don't know if they'll be open about that or not. And trying to find ways to connect in a way that seems like, oh, this just is totally circumstantial and not something that I orchestrated at all. Like, I just really enjoy this aspect of it. I like the flirting, I guess. That's the thing I'm kind of really here for. And it, like the flirting that is backed by more than just, I want to have a good time. Flirting that's like, no, I am intensely into you and I'm trying to be cool so hard. And he tells her like, yeah, you really fucked me up a little bit by like everybody telling me that you were dead. I was so upset. And then when I found out that you were okay, and she's like, well, I'm really sorry for that. And he says, there's nothing to forgive. I've not had many reasons to be happy of late, and the feelings I experienced on hearing that you lived cannot compare to any other, except perhaps what I feel now when I look at you. And Triss is elated. Like, him saying this is more, I think, than she hoped for at all. And I'm like sitting there like, Geralt, but what about Yennefer though? Because I thought that you were like super duper in love with her. And Yennefer is brought up a little bit later, and we'll get to that. And she immediately like jumps on him, puts her arms around his neck and starts to kiss him. And he's sort of like trying to push, he's, I don't want to say he's rejecting her because he isn't. Like, he's clearly sort of just trying to maintain some fucking decorum, I think is what it is. But the fact that he doesn't completely lose it is, to me, an indicator that he is not quite as into her as she is into him. And I could be wrong about that because he's a Witcher and he has a lot of training in how to be cool. So maybe he's just a lot better at restraining himself than she is. Or maybe he just has more reason to restrain himself than she does at this moment because he's surrounded by colleagues and like a child who depends on him. But yeah, it's this moment that's like, I feel really bad for her in some ways because she's like so into it, and the kind of tingling that comes over her when he touches her is, it's like a drug a little bit, you know. She has such a reaction to it. So Vesemir comes and joins them at this point. And when I hear about Vesemir, I think of Mad Eye Moody. He's a guy who has seen some shit. He's older, but he is still like very spry and like, you know, in better shape than a lot of much younger people. And he's a little bit saucy. Like, he tries to grab her ass at one point, to which she's just like, dude, no. But she seems to take it in stride, even though I find that annoying and gross. But yeah, I think that it's, he tries to say, my bones ache, so I want to howl. Will you help an old man, child? And she later on is thinking about how they're trying to act like they brought her here to help him. And she's like, I'm not an idiot. I know this isn't why I'm here. You're not a typical old man. The complaints that you're going to have are going to be so minor that there's no way that you need me for that. The problem is that the Witchers don't have any magicians working for them anymore. And everything that they used to do in order to mutate their students, they don't know how to do anymore. They have like the ingredients and they have the recipes, but they don't have the magic and they don't have the knowledge. And they're clearly going to try and get her to help them with doing these things. There's like the trial of grass, I think, and changes, I think is the name of it. And she's just like, can you just all be fucking straight up with me on this, please? Because I swear to God, you're insulting me, basically, by trying to behave as if I'm not going to know better. And let's see. It seems you have muddled the stories, boys. In the fairy tales I was told, shepherdesses and orphans become princesses. But here, I see, a princess is becoming a witcher. Does that not appear somewhat daring to you? It is not what you think. Geralt brought her here last autumn. She has no one, apart from... Triss, how can one not believe in destiny when... I'm trying to find where's the... Because I, hit the thing and I lost my spot. Oh, right, here it is. How can one not believe in destiny when... What has destiny to do with waving a sword around? We are teaching her to fence, Geralt said quietly, turning towards her and looking her straight in the eyes. What else are we to teach her? We know nothing else. Destiny or no, Kaer Morhen is now her home, at least for a while. Training and swordsmanship amuse her, keep her healthy and fit. They allow her to forget the tragedy she has lived through. This is her home now, Triss. She has no other. Masses of Cintrians, the enchantress said, holding his gaze, fled to Verden after the defeat, to Bruges, to Meria, and the islands of Skellig. Amongst them are magnates, barons, knights, friends, relations, as well as this girl's subjects. Friends and relations did not look for her after the war. They did not find her. Because she was not destined for them? She smiled at him, not sincerely, but very prettily. As prettily as she could. So yeah, this moment I kind of liked. It's just her sort of calling them out, trying to act like, well, we have no choice but to keep her. And she's like, don't give me that shit. You guys are choosing to keep her for your own reasons, and trying to act as if you're at the mercy of destiny is bullshit, and you know it's bullshit. And again, don't insult me. I love Triss. I just do. She's great. And this continued, this kind of thing, this back and forth with her sort of calling them out and them defending themselves goes on back and forth. And they have a bed set up for her that is the best bed in the castle, in one of the nicer rooms in the castle. And while she's like, I appreciate the thought, she's also really bummed because she wants to fuck Geralt, and she is hoping that he's going to meet with her in her room, and spoiler alert, he does not do that. And I basically have gone over everything, all of the things that she thinks about here. Triss thrashed about in the bedclothes, feeling a wave of heat come over her, and a wave of arousal, made all the stronger by anger. She swore quietly, kicked her quilt away, and rolled onto her side. I've no control over myself, she thought. I'm behaving like a stupid adolescent. Or even worse, like an old maid deprived of affection. I can't even think logically. And then she has to sort of talk herself down and be like, he didn't call for you because he wants you. You have to stop hoping for that and stop thinking about it. It's not like that. And I do, I enjoy, I'm seeing that Melanie said earlier, the angry arousal bit bugs the hell out of me. I can't agree with you on that. This part actually made me laugh because I have been this woman who's really wanting to fuck a particular dude and not used to rejection at all. And the guy is not coming through and you're just kind of like, what the fuck? And it gets you, you're really horny, but also pissed about it. How dare you have this effect on me? And it's this sort of, you're indignant about it, and I related to this in this way that I found really irritated by, because I don't, there is a sort of pride again that goes with that I enjoy a lot. I just find Triss really fun in her weird way. And she is there's a description of her sex life and the fact that at first she was prohibited from indulging when she was being taught. Then she was given independence And it says, which was followed by a freedom and a crazy promiscuity, which ended, as it usually does, in bitterness, disillusionment, and resignation. Which I'm not sure that's always true, but I feel that. And then followed a long period of loneliness and the discovery that if she wanted to release her tension and stress, then someone who wanted to consider himself her lord and master was entirely superfluous. There were far less troublesome ways of calming her nerves. And so then she starts to get involved with women. But then she realizes that, like, with women, it can be just as, like, sloppy and inconvenient. Then she tries sleeping with magicians and finds it to be, like, kind of distant and it says cold, technical, and almost ritual, which makes a lot of sense that they would approach it that way. Then Geralt of Rivia appeared, a witcher leading a stormy life and tied to her good friend Yennefer in a strange, turbulent, and almost violent relationship. Triss had watched them both and was jealous, even though it seemed there was little to be jealous of. Their relationship was quite obviously making them both unhappy and had led straight to destruction, pain. And yet, against all logic, it had lasted. Triss couldn't understand it, and it had fascinated her. It had fascinated her to such an extent that she had seduced the Witcher with the help of a little magic. She had hit on a propitious moment, a moment when he and Yennefer had scratched at each other's eyes yet again and had abruptly parted. Geralt had needed warmth and had wanted to forget. No, Triss had not desired to take him away from Yennefer. As a matter of fact, her friend was more important to her than he was, but her brief relationship with the Witcher had not disappointed. She found what she was looking for. Emotions in the form of guilt, anxiety, and pain. His pain. She had experienced his emotions, it had excited her, and when they parted, she had been unable to forget it. And she had only recently understood what pain is. Is that weird? Because that feels really weird to me. Just I was looking for guilt, anxiety, and pain. I don't understand that. I also don't like the fact that she uses, like, magic to help her seduce him, because that feels dangerously close to rape. And I am not here for anybody, like, tricking somebody into having sex with them. So I'm not sure how that went down, but I'm side-eyeing her a little bit for that. And basically what it comes down to is that she's, like, you know, kind of was interested, and then when she actually had sex with him, it was just a lot better than she ever expected, and now she's kind of hooked. So then she starts to, like, kind of pull herself back from thinking about him again, and is thinking about the fact that, like, the child needs her help, and that they're going to ask her to do whatever needs doing for the trial of grasses and changes. And I'll learn something no living wizard has learned. Their famous grasses and herbs, the secret virus cultures, the renowned mysterious recipes. Which I'm like, the virus cultures? What? And I will watch the changes of mutation and watch with my own eyes. Watch the ashen-haired child die. Oh, no. Triss shuddered again. Never. Not at such a price. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I only have like 5 minutes left. See? One chapter. Plenty to talk about. But she is noticing that, like, there are some things that Ciri is obviously used to eating and drinking every day that they're not giving her in front of Triss because it's got stuff in it that she's not really supposed to know about. And she calls them out for that again later, and also mentions, you probably want to lighten up on that, guys, and give her some actual real food in addition to all of these, like, tinctures and whatnot, because she is still a growing child and she's a woman, and you guys aren't used to that. But you could fuck up her hormonal, like, growth if you keep on feeding her just all of this, like, weird mushroom stuff and herbs and whatever. And it turns out that Ciri has her period and has not wanted to tell them about it because she feels ashamed of it and has been taught never to talk to men about such a thing. And this is the thing that I had a little bit of an issue with, is the idea, and I'm going to preface this by saying I have my own experience with having a period, and I understand that all women have very different experiences with it. But what kind of killed me is that Triss is really angry at the fact that they are making her go through her training, despite the fact that she has her period, without any knowledge of how much extra it's costing her and how hard it is for her. And this is the kind of thing that, like, I know that for some women, it would be a huge issue. And apparently for this little girl, it is. But there's a certain, like, anger in the way that Triss handles this that feels like you should know that this is going to be a problem. And I am somebody who, like, do I get cramping and stuff when I have my period? Sure. But does that get in the way of me being able to do plenty of other stuff? Not necessarily. And if this girl says that this is a problem for her, then sure. But there's something like that. Triss sort of behaves as if they should take it as a foregone conclusion that she shouldn't be training when she has her period. And I feel like there have been a lot of studies done, and a lot of my personal experience and the experience of my friends shows that far from, like, sitting still and just suffering, getting moving and having exercise when you have your period helps a lot with the pain. And like I said, we all have our different things, but there was something about this and the way that, like, I am indisposed and I will wear a dress when I'm not going to be training and when I have my time on me. And that felt very much like a dude who's just like, I don't know, periods basically render you completely helpless. Am I right? So, yeah, she's just not going to train at all when she has her period. And I was like, I guess. But, you know, like I said, there are going to be some people who definitely feel that this is like, I mean, it's been a tradition in a lot of cultures for women to just take time out of society. And I know that in a lot of places that is framed in such a way as to be insulting, where it's like a woman is away from society because she's unclean. And that, fuck that. But in the societies where it's women are going to take time away because this is a time for being, like, introverted and being around other women and resting, that is the kind of shit that I am here for. So in that respect, I kind of like it. I don't know. Melanie is saying, seems to me like Triss is unintentionally saying that her period is a weakness. Yeah, you know, and like I said, I understand that there are women who are genuinely, like, laid out when they get their period. Like, it's a bad time where they have bad cramping and other issues. Like, I can get really bad depression. That, like, I have premenstrual dysphoric disorder, so I can go through a pretty dark time. But again, it's not like it renders me incapable. It's just, I have to push myself a little harder, and I have to be gentler with myself, but it doesn't mean that I completely, like, disassociate from society or completely drop every, like, physical thing that I have been undertaking. So I just have a weird vibe from this. It just feels very, like, it just feels like a guy wrote this. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? But, you know, I also do kind of like the fact that they are addressing that these guys aren't experienced at raising a little girl, and that they don't fucking know. Not only do they not know what to worry about, but that it doesn't even occur to them to worry about it yet. And this girl's 12 years old. Like, this is around the time a lot of girls get their periods. I unfortunately got my period when I was 9, which is not fair. And the universe can go fuck itself for that. But yeah, the fact that, like, this girl has been getting this for months and they had no idea, and they didn't even think to ask, because why would they? Because they don't fucking think about this shit. I appreciate that that's addressed, because that feels very correct. But yeah, she's so mad. And she also, like, the fact that she gives this girl this dress, and is, like, trying to fix the clothing that she's wearing. I enjoy it. Like, she's just trying to be like, can you guys do more than the bare minimum, please? I understand that training her to be a witcher is, like, paramount to you, but that doesn't mean that has to be the only thing. She's not a fucking robot that you're programming. Can we act like she's a person? That would be awesome. And Melanie says, hey, Natasha, before you wrap up, did you read the snippet at the end of this chapter? Yes, I did. I'll jump ahead to there because I pretty much covered all of this. Making sure that she drinks milk. Geralt disappeared somewhere and appeared only towards evening bearing a dead goat. And she helps him, like, with skinning it and everything, even though she hates it. All right, so on the third day, all the children died save one, a male barely 10. Hitherto agitated by a sudden madness, he fell all at once into a deep stupor. His eyes took on a glassy gaze. Incessantly with his hands did he clutch at clothing, or brandish them in the air as if desirous of catching a quill. His breathing grew loud and hoarse. Sweat, cold, clammy, and malodorous, appeared on his skin. Then he once more was given elixir through the vein, and the seizure it did return. This time a nosebleed did ensue. Coughing turned to vomiting, after which the male weakened entirely and became inert. For 2 days more did symptoms not subside. The child's skin, hitherto drenched in sweat, grew dry and hot. The pulse ceased to be full and firm, albeit remaining of average strength, slow rather than fast. No more did he wake, nor did he scream. Finally came the 7th day. The male awoke and opened his eyes, and his eyes were as those of a viper. By Carla Demetia Crest, The Trial of Grasses and Other Secret Witcher Practices Seen with My Own Eyes. Manuscript exclusively accessible to the Chapter of Wizards. So that's some shit. Basically, this trial, all of the children die except one. So this fucking thing, they can train them and all this shit, but then they feed them some fucking potion that is almost guaranteed to kill them. And the very few that manage to make it out alive become actual witchers, like fully fledged. Well then, I understand Triss being like excited about the prospect of participating in this, but also being like, I don't know that I want to do this actually. Yeah, you know what, Triss? That is the correct reaction. Like, this is so unlikely to work. And I'm sure it will work because it's the book, you know. I don't think this little girl's going to die. But it's also like, Jesus Christ, you know, what they put themselves through. Krista says, can't they just poison them first and then train the ones who live? Right? I'm wondering if they have to let them reach a certain age, or else it will definitely kill all of them. If there's a point at which they're old enough that this is like going to work and otherwise it wouldn't. But yeah, so I'm going to wrap this up, folks, because I have the next episode. I will be covering Dairy Girls, episode 1, which if you haven't watched Dairy Girls, it's on Netflix and you should. But yeah, there's a lot happening here. I'm really happy to be with Triss. She's great. And I'm very curious as to how Geralt feels about her. So thank you, Melanie, for commissioning this. And Melanie has commissioned another one next week, I think. So there will be another one coming up. And I thank you guys all for coming into the chat and hanging out with me. And I will see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.